Hey, here we go. After a frugal supper of cabbage and carrot soup and liverwurst, liver sausage, Helmut hurries Oma as they clear away the dishes. Finally, Oma and Opa retreat to their bedroom and latch the door behind them. Helmut paces the living room and listens for footsteps. At last, he hears feet shuffle outside the flat. Before Carl has a chance to knock, Helmut swings open the door. He ushers him in, his fingers to his lips, signaling for quiet. "So what is it?" whispers Carl. "What sort of proof do you have?" "You'll see," says Helmut. He eases open the closet, takes out the roll of shortwave radio, sets it on the kitchen table directly in front of Carl. Carl swallows hard. "Are you crazy?" He gingerly touches the raised roll of lettering, as if afraid it will shock him, but then his eyes shine with interest. "What can you hear on it?" "You'll see," says Helmut. As he rigs up the wire antenna, he turns out the kitchen light, snaps on the radio. The radio hums to life. Its dim amber lights cast an eerie glow in the darkness. Helmut tunes the dial. The radio crackles and squawks, interrupted now and then by something soothing French voice. Then a wisp of violin and a quiet French horn, and then the first four notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Bum 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 bum. Crackle from the speaker, followed by an announcer who says in crisp German, "The BBC in London presents the news in German." Carl bolts upright. "It's England." Helmut gives Carl a triumphant look. "Sit down," he says. "You don't want to wake my grandparents." He adjusts the volume. "What if someone hears us?" says Carl. Helmut hears the nervous edging in Carl's voice. He nods toward the flat door and tells Carl, "You don't have to stay if you're afraid." Carl shakes his head, settles himself firmly in the chair. "I'm not afraid," he says. "Good," says Helmut, but he understands Carl's fear. His own heart pounds each time he listens to the BBC. Is every good German's duty to report enemy propaganda to the Gestapo, to turn in anyone suspected of listening or reading enemy propaganda? Helmut tries not to think about the danger. The news that night is all about the Russian campaign. It's nothing like the German reports. All week long, the RRG have boasted of great success in Russia, one battle victory after another, with little or no German losses as the German army advances on Smolnik. The Germans approached within rifle range, recounts the BBC broadcaster. Then the Russians opened up with grenades and machine guns. The Russians organized a bayonet counterattack and forced the Germans to retreat. The Nazis left behind 2,500 dead and wounded, 30 tanks and Bren gun carriers, 80 motorcycles, almost 500 automatic weapons, 90 machine guns, and 45 mortars. Carl looks sickened. A bayonet charge. Helmut feels sickened too. He can't bear to think what Gerhardt might face if he's sent to Russia. "Do you think the BBC is telling the truth?" asks Carl. Helmut nods. "The BBC reports give more details. They give their own casualties too, not just ours. They don't hide the news from the British people. They just give the information without telling us how to interpret it." He looks at Carl. "I despise the Nazis. I hate the way they bully people. I hate the way they lie to us, and I hate them for telling me what to think." "But what can we do?" "Look what happens when people speak out. They're arrested, taken to camps. Some are never seen again. Look what they did to Brother Vorbs." "I hate myself for doing nothing," says Helmut bitterly, "for allowing this to happen. Everyone craves security, but gaining freedom means losing security?" "You sound like a bloody pamphlet," says Carl. Helmut likes that. "Do you want to listen again tomorrow?" he asks. Carl grimaces, looks sheepish. "My parents won't let me out every night. They're afraid if I'll get caught in the air raid." Helmut knows Carl's parents are strict about curfew, especially his father, but he also senses his friend's fear of breaking the law. Carl leaves and Helmut sits back at the table, presses his back against the chair. He twists the dial to the RRG and he listens. He grows angry all over again at its twisted lies. Suddenly, Carl's face floats in front of Helmut. "You sound like a bloody pamphlet. You sound like a bloody pamphlet. A bloody pamphlet. A pamphlet." Helmut feels his thoughts changing, charging ahead to a dangerous place. Slowly, an idea raises to the surface, floats in front of Helmut. He catches it, breathes it in, and it grips him. Won't let him go. He snaps on the light, takes out a piece of paper, jots down everything he can remember from the BBC broadcast. By midnight, he has an essay titled, "Who is Lying?" The next night, Helmut invites Rudy to listen to the radio. He doesn't mention that Carl listened the night before. It's safer that way. As soon as the announcer says this is BBC London, Rudy nearly knocks over his chair. "That's a shortwave," he cries. "What if someone hears?" "No one will hear if you keep your voice down," says Helmut. "I've been listening for weeks and I'm still here." Rudy looks unconvinced. "But it's against the law." "I won't force you to stay," says Helmut. "You can leave now and never come back. Maybe someday you will find some courage." That's a burn. The words sting. Helmut knows. He regrets hurting Rudy's feelings, but he tells himself that the words are for Rudy's own good. Rudy plants himself solidly in his chair. "I'm staying." "It's fine," Helmut assures him. "You want to know the truth, don't you?" Throughout August, Helmut listens to the BBC, one night with Carl and another night with Rudy. He feels guilty over this deception, but he knows it's best to meet separately, for their own sake as well as his. They sit in the dark, the small flat lit only by the dim amber light of the radio, and listen to the British voices, pulsing, crackling across the airwaves. It's thrilling, too, to know they're breaking the Nazi law. Breaking the law goes against their church teachings, but the boys feel sure that they have a responsibility to learn the truth. September. Helmut decides it's time to bring Rudy and Carl together, so they can all listen to the BBC. As he waits for Carl one night, he grows impatient. Usually Carl is right on time, but tonight he's late. At last, the familiar knock. Helmut flings open the door. "Where have you been?" he asks. Helmut didn't wait for Carl to answer. He beckons him inside. At the kitchen table sits Rudy. The two boys stare in shock at each other and in betrayal at Helmut. Helmut ushers them outside, saying, "Let's go get some fresh air. I'll explain everything." Outside, Carl paces back and forth, angry. "Why the secrecy, Helmut? Didn't you think you could trust us?" "Of course I trust you," says Helmut. "It was for your own protection, for your own safety." "Safety," says Carl. "That's what the Nazis say when they keep the truth from us." "It's not the same thing," says Helmut. "Suppose the Gestapo arrested you or Rudy. Suppose they questioned you. You know they'll stop at nothing to get names. This way, you'll only know one name, mine." Fear flashes across Rudy's face. "He's right, Carl. Remember what happened to me in the hospital?" "But Helmut wasn't honest with us," says Carl. "We had a right to know. We're not Nazis." The words sting, but Helmut knows that Carl is right. Even if Helmut's intentions were good. "I'm sorry," he says. "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings." Carl lets the apology settle over him. "All right," he says. "It's nearly 10 o'clock. Let's go inside." And just like that, the tension is lifted as the three friends head inside. In the kitchen, Helmut tries to tune in London. The radio beeps and buzzes and squawks and crackles so much it's impossible to hear a word. He waits a few minutes, tries again, turning the dial this way and that, but no use. The jamming is too strong. "Maybe it's for the best," says Rudy. He stands, looks anxious to leave. Carl stands too. Helmut remains seated. He looks at his friends. "Wait, there's another reason why I brought you together tonight. I want you to both know that I've decided to serve the fatherland." Carl and Rudy look at Helmut uneasy. "What do you mean?" says Carl. Helmut goes into his bedroom. He returns with his carefully written notes and a short stack of handwritten leaflets. He hands one to Carl, who reads out loud, "It's all Hitler's fault." Carl looks at Helmut in disbelief. Continues reading. "During the unrestricted air raids, several 100,000 defenseless civilians were killed. The British Royal Air Force is not to blame for these killings. Their fights are retaliation for those killed by German Luftwaffe in Warsaw and Rotterdam. The Luftwaffe murdered defenseless women and children, cripples and old men." "Are you crazy?" says Rudy. "I've got more," says Helmut. He pages through the leaflets, reads off others he's written. "Hitler the murderer. They're not telling you everything. Where is Rudolf Hess and Hitler Youth?" Rudy grabs the Hitler Youth flyer. "German boys," he reads. "Do you know what the Hitler Youth is and what goals it pursues?" Rudy grunts in agreement. "It's a compulsory organization of the highest order for the cultivation of obedient Nazis." "You sure got that right," says Carl. "These flyers are really something, the way you attack the Nazis." Helmut looks earnestly at his friends. "We must attack. We're being lied to. We must let people know the truth." Read the last line, Carl. "This is a chain letter, so please pass it on," reads Carl. "This is a war against lies," says Helmut. If we want to win, we can't attack in straight lines. We leave leaflets everywhere in telephones, booths, mailboxes, apartments. For people to read and pass on like a chain letter. They'll pass them on all right, right to the Gestapo, says Carl. Helmut, says Rudy, remember our Lord Lister ID cards, how quickly they were passed to the Gestapo? And this is worse. It's no game. Of course it's no game. Every day the newspaper tells us about people who are sentenced to death or prison for breaking the radio law when all they want is the truth. This is serious. Do you really think we can fight the Nazi government, says Carl? They're too big, too powerful. We must fight, with words and actions. Not everyone agrees with Hitler and the Nazi Party, says Helmut. If we tell the real story about the war, show people that they're not alone, they will start to talk. Then they will grow in strength and numbers. What if the Gestapo catches us? Asked Carl. It's serious to break a law like this. This kind of law must be broken, and besides, the Gestapo will never catch us, says Helmut. We'll make sure they don't. They might find the leaflets, but they won't know who did it, and they'll never suspect kids. But what if they do? Says Rudy. Helmut considers the possibility, and then that person should take all the blame, he says decidedly. Rudy's eyes widen. He looks at Carl. We're all under 18, says Helmut. Even if we are caught, we won't be tried as adults. He stares at the pamphlets. I don't want to remember a time I could have done something, but I didn't. The boys are silent for a long time. You're right, says Carl, sticking out his hand. Count me in. No names. No names, says Rudy. No names, says Helmut. The boys pump each other's hands vigorously. Helmut takes half of the pamphlets, divides the rest between Carl and Rudy. Outside the flat on the street, Helmut watches as Carl and Rudy head down the street. The sky looks like gray wool, and that's a good thing. The cloud cover will keep the British bombers away. Helmut heads in the opposite direction, down Lustvig, leaflets tucked beneath his shirt. All right, I'll talk to you later.